All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 6th Emerging Growth Conference. I'm Anna Berry, and I'm thrilled to be your host. So just a few notes for all those who are attending. So this is a live, continuous event. It's beginning now, and it's going until 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So when we switch to the next company, you're going to see a black screen for a brief moment. Don't go anywhere. It's just moving over and transitioning. If you do experience downtime for more than a minute or two, just refresh your browser and everything should work properly again. Plus, our platform works best on Google Chrome. So if you're watching from an Apple device, you might have to hit the play button to start the session. As always, we have an exciting lineup of companies and a wide range of growth sectors presenting to us today. Our previous conferences and all conferences to come, they're going to be uploaded to the Emerging Growth Conference YouTube channel. So please subscribe, youtube.com/Emerging Growth Conference. During each company's presentation, you, the attendees, can submit questions through the webinar module, and presenters will attempt to address as many of those questions as possible at the end of their presentation. So today, we have 10 companies presenting. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first. We have Todos Medical Limited. It trades on the OTCQB under the ticker symbol TOMDF and engineers life-saving diagnostic solutions for the early detection of a variety of cancers. Joining us is Gerald, Commissiong, CEO of Todos Medical. Welcome, Gerald.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
All right, whenever you're ready, it's all yours.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone, for joining the webcast here, the Emerging Growth Conference. I'm Gerald Commissiong, CEO of Todos Medical. Todos Medical was really born as a diagnostic testing solutions company for the immune system with a focus initially on cancer. We've expanded the ability of the company to do things other than cancer into COVID and to Alzheimer's as a result of some acquisitions, and obviously into COVID as a result of what went on with the pandemic last year. Interestingly, through one of our diagnostic testing solutions, we've also developed some therapeutic and dietary supplement products based upon some targeting, and I'll talk about those at the end. Very exciting for COVID. A little bit from a safe harbor statement, the typical safe harbor forward-looking statement about what we're doing here as a public company. A little bit about the management team. So, my background is really in mergers and acquisitions. I was previously at a company called Amaranthus Bioscience Holdings. We sold a subsidiary to Todos, and then they asked me to step in as a CEO early last year. We've got a very seasoned team in terms of professionals working for the company who have experience in the life sciences industry. We have Dr. Jorge Leon, who's really one of the key executives at Quest Genomics. He built up the entire genomic profile for that subsidiary at Quest Diagnostics and has been instrumental in helping us build out our oncology and COVID strategy over the last year. Dr. Paula Trapaz, who was previously director at Eli Lilly, helped bring Amyvid, the first Alzheimer's diagnostic, to market through the FDA and into commercialization. So she's been extremely helpful with regards to our neurology portfolio, specifically our Alzheimer's tests. And Dr. Elise Brownell, who's helping manage the entire R&D portfolio. And my job, my primary responsibility has been, to help build out the commercial side of the business over the last year. So what is Todos, and how do we get from, a number of press releases that, people have seen out there in terms of what we're doing for revenue generation in COVID. And at the same time, we're talking about bringing some new technologies to market in areas like cancer and Alzheimer's. Well, it really is, when you think about R&D and leading into commercialization, there's really a continuum that we've been able to create here at Todos that should allow us to feed our pipeline for years to come. So we started last year generating revenue focused on COVID supplies. So being able to supply labs who are getting into COVID testing with the necessary reagents and other materials so that they could have a stable supply chain and do large volumes of tests. This was the need in the market last year as the U.S. was, frantically trying to increase its lab testing capacity. And so we got involved in that area and really built out supply chains, commercial supply chains that allow us to, get really good cost, to have certainty of delivery, and be able to give labs the comfort and what they need to do is just focus on processing tests, not worry about their supply chain. Obviously, as we built out that supply chain and started generating revenue, we moved also to look at some proprietary technologies in COVID, based upon some really interesting partnerships that we were able to put together. There we have partnership with a company called NLC Pharma, so we have some proprietary diagnostic technologies that we've put together, and that that dovetails quite well into our cancer and our Alzheimer's portfolio because of our platform technology, which I'll talk about in a minute. So these new next generation detection technologies are really all centered on the immune system, as we know from cancer, and we're seeing some really tremendous results in recent years with the immunotherapies. Being able to look at the immune system and understand how it works is critical now to addressing a number of diseases. So immunodiagnostics are an emerging field so that we can really figure out which of these immunotherapies we want to give to which patients. And we're also starting to understand that immunotherapy is not going to be limited to cancer, but likely is going to be effective in a number of indications. And so, the whole field of immunodiagnostics is something that we feel is really getting ready to explode. And so we've developed or acquired different technology platforms to be able to measure the immune system. We have our proprietary TBIA platform, which stands for Total Biochemical Infrared Analysis. And I'll talk about that in greater detail in the next slide. That's really the base of the company, where, we feel that we can really make a very, very significant difference on a global basis with our IP. We have a flow cytometry platform to look at the immune system. And then we also have now a liquid biopsy tumor-associated antibody platform where we're looking at markers in the blood that are directly coming from cancer. And so because of that, that's a technology that we feel is ready to go to market now. The markets that we're going after with these different platforms, obviously very, very large. COVID, went from being something no one ever heard of to well in excess of $100 billion market from a diagnostic perspective globally. And in the US, countries averaging anywhere between 1 million and 2 million tests a day at a cost of anywhere between $50 and $150 a test. So that's a huge market that's been created in the last year. Obviously, we know that Alzheimer's, the market opportunity there sits in the multi-billion, given that it's a $1.2 trillion market right now. And the cancer diagnostics market, is well into the billions as well. So we're addressing these large markets. And what's really unique about the situation for Todos is because we spent so much time building out our supply chains, because we spent so much time focusing on automation, and really creating workflows that can optimize throughput, we've focused now and we have the capabilities to bring what we brought to COVID into our other technology platforms by optimizing them with automation. So really, from a soup to nuts perspective, we've got revenue now by supplying other labs. Because of that experience, we now have our own lab in Provista Diagnostics where we've optimized, our own supply chain to be able to really lower our costs and increase the profit margins. And we're going to be driving business there. Into that lab, we're going to be bringing our next generation of IP, really focused on immunodiagnostics with our different technology platforms that we'll be able to deploy at Provista to tap into these large markets. And we think that we can do that, with some degree of scale because of the engineering focus we've had over the last year. So from a summary basis, we feel like we're in a very good position to grow. Now, why Todos? What is the reason that Todos would be a company that you would want to focus on? Really, at the end of the day, it boils down, the big idea behind Todos is this TBIA immune screening platform. What this is doing is it's taking a blood sample and using this spectroscopy platform, we're able to create a signature for different diseases. Now, the focus of this has been cancer, and we have a CE mark in breast cancer and colon cancer, but we think this is going to be applicable not just to cancer, but also to viruses and bacteria, as well as autoimmune diseases. So a single blood test that has, doesn't need multiple antibodies, isn't looking for different markers, that increases the cost of goods sold or slightly tweaks the assay based upon, what you're looking for. Here, we're looking for patterns of activity that are identified using this spectroscopy. And because of that, it's highly, highly scalable. So ultimately, any of the other technologies that we bring to market that are closer to market now will allow us to feed that data into our TBIA immune screening platform and ultimately build that out as a replacement for almost every single blood test in the area of cancer from a screening perspective. Once you have a hit, then we would expect that you're going to go down for more deep dive diagnostics once we've guided you in the right direction. But certainly for cancer, we've shown that we can identify that there is cancer, and we can identify the tissue of origin of that cancer, and we can do so at a very, very early stage of disease. And so as we continue to build out the data sets underlying TBIA, using patient data gathered from other platforms, it's really important to understand that every single patient we feed into this immune screening platform is going to create more data, more accurate results, and ultimately more tests that can be run on our platform. A little bit about, the objective. Obviously, everywhere we go, the whole diagnostic system is really focused on creating greater confidence to either rule in or rule out disease, and giving that actionable information to physicians and patients so that they can make decisions earlier. And when you make decisions earlier, then you lower healthcare costs and you're able to manage disease better. I think this is true for, every diagnostic company out there and every therapeutics company. Everything is now being aligned to improve outcomes and reduce costs. And what that means is you first have to identify diseases as early as possible. So what do we have from a proprietary perspective? We see the transition from a Mac to PC didn't quite go well here. But from the proprietary pipeline perspective, we have our VADASA breast cancer test, which is a rule-out breast cancer test that is commercial ready now. We're in the process of getting that test ready for commercialization towards the end of 2021 at our Provista lab. We have our Alzheimer's blood test, the LinPro test, which is currently in clinical studies, and it's going to be rolled out on a investigational use. We're going to be partnering that with different clinical trials that the pharmaceutical industry is going, and we're now waiting for some additional data to read out on the correlation of our test and amyloid. It's very exciting. And then we have our proprietary Tolo test. Here we're measuring the 3CL protease, and we see this as actually a very good proxy for viral load. So it's a little bit better than CT values, and we think that we can actually identify the onset of disease earlier than PCR with this test. So we're actually now focused on using this biomarker to monitor activity in one of our therapeutics programs, which I'll talk about towards the end. And then we have our big TM, this total biochemical infrared analysis platform for breast cancer, for dense breasts, for all breasts, and then colorectal cancer. And that platform, we expect, as we build out the data sets, we'll be able to start to bring those online in the next year to 2 years with those different tests. So really, we've got a full pipeline. It's really initially centered on cancer. And we believe that Alzheimer's is actually cancer of cells that can't divide. So there's a lot of biological synergy within the portfolio that are addressing large markets. But in the very short term, the focus is VADASA. Just briefly touching on what we can do and where our revenue comes from. We focused on the last year of creating workflows for CLIA labs to do PCR testing for COVID-19. That's where we generated our revenue, and we understand, every single part of this process, and are actually deploying this now at Provista, which is our lab. So this is where the revenue is generated from. We were able to support every single component in this chain, optimize the systems, and then we have the supply chains of the different materials needed to run the testing, from the swabs all the way down to the pipette tips at scale, so that we can yield results in a very proficient manner for our clients and now for ourselves. And so at Provista, what we're going to be doing is we've already put in some of this automation to increase their capacity so that we can get into stable revenue, not just supplying the labs where, we spend X, we sell at a premium to X, and then they take that and then they make 3 or 4 times what we would make selling to them. We now have our own lab where we can get that margin. And that's really going to be our focus over the next several months, building up our own lab capability, building up revenue into this lab so that we can ultimately really drive growth and get the lab staff in a position that they can start to handle the rollout of the VADASA test later on in the year, LimPro after that, and then the rest of our TBIA platform, which is going to be sitting in the background collecting data to optimize the algorithms. So now that we have our own lab, we're very excited that this is going to serve as the base of operations to bring the company forward. So a little bit about, cancer, breast cancer and colon cancer. Really, as we all know, cancer screening tests are critical because the earlier you find the disease, the quicker you can have an impact and the less likely it is you're going to have a bad outcome. Unfortunately, right now in cancer, most of the screening is done with imaging tests. And that, presents several challenges from a delivery of care perspective, from a quality perspective, and from a scale perspective. And so really, as we look at blood testing, we believe that blood testing, provided that you can identify the cancers appropriately, can have a major advantage because, you can add routine cancer screening to your yearly round of blood tests. And that would have a very significant impact on a population basis to identify cancer earlier. So really, what we specialize in is blood tests for cancer. And we know that mammograms, they have significant challenges in terms of picking up. And we also know that dense breast is a major issue for a large number of women. And dense breast almost makes mammograms obsolete. Similarly, for colorectal cancer, we know that, colorectal cancer evaluations are not very popular. And if you could find better ways to be able to screen patients other than a colorectal exam, you'd find a market. And we've seen that with Exact Sciences and their ability to really drive market share in a new method of colorectal cancer screening. We believe our technology will allow us to do the same thing. But right now, the initial focus is on breast cancer, and specifically dense breast. So, if you look at the marketplace for breast cancer, there are about 30 million women who undergo mammography on an annual basis. Approximately 40% of those women are likely to have dense breast. Dense breast has become such a problem that 32 states have passed legislation outlining that patients must be informed of their breast density. And the reason for that is because what happens when you have dense breasts is that women often undergo not just the initial mammogram, but then a series of additional tests, ultimately that lead to a biopsy. And the vast majority of the time, those tests show that there is, in fact, no cancer. And this became somewhat of a cash cow for screening programs because they knew that this 40% of women, no matter what, we're going to have an inconclusive mammogram and we're going to be led down the primrose path of having to ultimately have a biopsy, largely unnecessarily. So the challenge, for those women is, do you get breast cancer screening or not? Because you know that you're going to undergo a series of tests that may not necessarily lead to an outcome of interest. So for us, we're really targeting the $7 billion post-mammogram testing for which there's no adequate standard of care. And we're doing that initially with our VADASA test. And the key here for VADASA is it's not a positive predictive value test. We're not trying to confirm that you do have cancer. The most important thing in this dense breast market is to rule out cancer, to make sure that, if you tell a woman, you know what, you don't have cancer, that you've got a very, very high likelihood of being correct. And then also being able to monitor that, which blood testing really allows you to do in a way that imaging does not, to be able to confirm that over time, you continue to be at a very low risk for cancer. And, over 3 clinical studies and over 1,000 patients who were monitored, on a go-forward basis for years at a time, we were able to demonstrate with a really strong clinical network that includes the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Scripps, Harvard, Avera Health, and Stanford. We were able to demonstrate a 98.4% negative predictive value. That really shows whether you have dense breast or you don't have dense breast, or even if you combine that data, 98.4% of the time, when we tell you that there is no tumor, there is no tumor. And because this is a blood test, you can actually have this test done on a more frequent basis, so that, that 1.6% could potentially be picked up and figured out through serial testing. So that, as a result of that, if you look at what that translates into, we could potentially reduce biopsies on a combined basis by 45% in this BI-RADS3, BI-RADS4 dense breast population. If you think about the number of biopsies, if there are 30 million screens, 12 million women have dense breasts, and you could potentially reduce 45% of that dense breast population from going into biopsy, you're talking about millions and millions of tests that will not need to be performed, a huge savings to the healthcare system. And that is the target for VADASA. That is, from our perspective, VADASA is going to be what we bring into the market first. It's very clear that there's a huge market opportunity for VADASA, and so we're going to be focused on bringing that test into the market as an LDT and taking it forward through Provista. Now, the other area, obviously, which is another massive market opportunity, is in Alzheimer's disease. We all know the major challenge in Alzheimer's disease from a testing perspective is, okay, well, even if I know I have it, what am I going to do about it? So that's been one of the major challenges for these imaging agents, because ultimately they don't appear to be, good proxies for outcomes. So, if you have a reduction in amyloid on Amyvid, you don't necessarily have improved patient outcomes. And so from our perspective, we are laser focused on helping the pharmaceutical companies identify patients early so that they can be advanced into clinical trials. And what's really unique about our blood test for Alzheimer's is we're not targeting amyloid. We are targeting the cause of amyloid. So our belief, as I mentioned earlier, is that Alzheimer's disease is cancer of non-dividing cells. And as a result of being cancer of non-dividing cells, we see very early on that it's really an attempt of cell division. And when that cell is unable to complete the cell division process, it goes into apoptosis over an extended period of time. And that, is ultimately what leads to amyloid and tau. So scientifically, to get into the weeds of how this works, we've all heard of checkpoint inhibitors for cancer. So what that means is you're effectively trying to stop the cell from progressing from one step in the cell division process through the next step. And, whether it's the G1, GAP1, G1 phase, the synthesis phase, the GAP2 phase, or the mitosis phase, in between each of those phases is a checkpoint to ensure that the cell is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And obviously in disease, it's not. And so those checkpoints get perturbed. So what we see is that there's a leakiness at the G1S checkpoint that allows neurons that are not supposed to go into cell division to start the division process. They create additional RNA strands, so they create multiple strands of DNA within the same cell, and then start the process of being able to separate. So they create two cellular infrastructures. Unfortunately, because these cells are post-mitotic, because they're neurons, they can't end that process. And so what you get is two cellular infrastructures, multiple strands of DNA, creating too much amyloid, too much tau, and ultimately that's what leads to neuronal death. So what we're doing is we're measuring this activity by looking at the immune system and looking at cells that should not be dividing when poked in a certain way. And we're seeing that in Alzheimer's patients, those cells, in fact, are starting to divide. And this is a proxy on a systemic level on the body for what's going on in the brain. So we've got some, really compelling data that have been generated over the last 10 years. Recently, and the first half of an imaging study that we did to look at the LIMPRO scores versus amyloid PET in 2019, we saw an extremely strong correlation of our data with amyloid PET, so a p-value of 0.00002 and an R of 0.85. If you took out the outliers, so those that were, all the way at the top fully positive and those were all the way at the bottom fully negative, the R value would be in the 0.95 range. So almost a 1-for-1 relationship with amyloid concentrations. So that data is being replicated right now at our partners at the University of Leipzig. And we're also beginning to contemplate, because there is now an amyloid PET, layering over the amyloid PET imaging data, really to get a good sense of how predictive and how early pre-symptomatically we can go back using the LIMPRO test as opposed to having to use the imaging agents. We believe that that's going to be a major competitive advantage, because if you can identify Alzheimer's with a blood test, then very, very early on, then you'll be able to advance patients who are likely to be earlier in the disease process into clinical trials. And if you can do that, you're likely to be able to see, a bigger delta because you're catching people before it's too late, which is really the hypothesis now in Alzheimer's. By the time you catch these people and get them into clinical trials for therapeutics, it's too late. So you need to catch them earlier. And you need to get them into studies earlier to see if we can identify these disease-modifying therapeutics that we believe going forward are not going to be targeted at amyloid reduction or tau reduction, but are going to be targeted at cell cycle dysregulation activity, which at the current time is really being addressed with checkpoint inhibitors and other cancer drugs. And so we're seeing a shift of many cancer drugs, low-dose cancer drugs moving into the field of Alzheimer's. We think that is a very, very strong likelihood of success. So, for example, we've seen Cassava have a significant amount of success looking at their clinical development program. It's really based on the same hypothesis that we're identifying here, something that sits upstream from amyloid. And we believe that, being able to bring this into the market for investigational use and for select commercial use until we get, a broader uptake and hopefully some therapeutics is really the way to go for this Alzheimer's program. So that is where we sit with our Alzheimer's program. It's very exciting, and we think that we'll be able to start generating some significant interest and commercializing that program in the first half of 2022. Now we've got our 3CL protease biomarker. This is really for COVID-19. So the story behind this is we entered into a joint venture with NLC Pharma, which is a leading company focused on coronavirus research out of Israel. Really, we fell in love with this target, which is this 3CL protease, because of its absolute necessity in terms of coronavirus replication process. And we see that the more protease there is, the more that the virus is able to replicate and exit the cell to go infect other cells. And measuring this mechanism is really a leading indicator for viral activity ahead of looking at PCR for the virus. So we've been, funding the development of this assay for some time over the last year. We were looking at initially as a point of care assay to compete with antigen. That is something that we're still extremely interested in moving it forward. But where we found initially there's market demand for this product is really measuring viral load in hospitalized patients to be able to confirm whether someone is likely going to have a further negative outcome, in combination with some other oxygen measuring tests and other things. And as a result of that, being able to really focus treatment on those patients who are having a difficult time mounting an immune response to challenge the replication of the virus. So as we got through the biology of this program, really started to understand the mechanism and start to see some really positive data, we expanded our relationship with NLC Pharma to include an inhibitor of this 3CL protease. And by inhibiting the 3CL protease, what we're able to do is we're actually able to stop the replication of SARS-CoV-2 in patients. And so we have been focused on the last year, really doing some dose finding in terms of what could ultimately be a pharmaceutical antiviral product. And we've landed on a dosing formulation that we call Tolovir, which is a high concentration of a natural product 3CL protease inhibitor, where we've put a dosing regimen together that appears to be very powerful in inhibiting the 3CL protease and therefore inhibiting the ability of SARS-CoV-2 to replicate and trigger a severe COVID-19 event. So we were heartened with the data we've generated. Now we have a phase 1 study in 27 patients. We're getting that data scrubbed so that it can be shared publicly based on a study that was done in Israel last year. We also have several thousand patients who used it on a compassionate use basis in different forms and formulations, with very strong results that were seen by physicians who recommended that their patients use this product in Israel. We've also had some good feedback based on some use here in the United States. And now, we're in a phase 2 trial in Israel, really looking at all the different measurements to be able to get an approval for Tolovir as the first protease inhibitor that would be on the market for COVID-19. Pfizer has launched a drug development program targeting the same mechanism, but they only created their product in the summer of 2020. So as a result, we have, a significant amount more human data than they do. And we believe that we have the ability to get to market ahead of them. So one of the things that we are looking at, given that this is a phase 2 trial and it's in Israel where there's a low case count, we may in fact turn this into a phase 2/3 clinical trial, pivotal. So right now we're evaluating different countries who have expressed interest in the product and seeing how we can bring this to market faster because the demand is there from a market perspective. And then what we do have, however, now today is a low-dose version of 3CL protease inhibitor. And actually, this has received a certificate of free sale by the FDA, which means we can sell it. It's commercially available now, today, in the United States. It's currently being sold, which we did on a test basis at a store in New York called the Alchemist Kitchen. We did a pilot launch. We've got some tremendous feedback from customers, really starting to understand how this product could be sold as a dietary supplement with the right explanations to clients, as opposed, we can't call them patients because this is not a prescription product, but as a low dose version of something that we have in clinical trials. We believe that, ultimately, if we are starting to show progress, or as we get some of our data out into the market on what we've seen, that this could significantly have a positive impact on people looking to take a dietary supplement 3CL protease inhibitor, because it could have a positive effect on their health and wellness in the face of these circulating coronaviruses. So for us, we see this as a really compelling commercial product, which is available and on sale now. We're starting to get some interest from other places because they're starting to understand the utility of this. And we did apply to the FDA for an upgraded dosing regimen that would really up the dose and reduce the amount of, the number of days that you'd be taking this for. So that's a 60 pill regimen over 5 days. And we're waiting for feedback from the FDA as to whether they'll approve that dosing regimen based upon the data that they've seen. So once we get confirmation, hopefully we get confirmation that we can go to a higher dosing regimen for Tolovir, we'll be definitely launching that version, that 60 pill version that you see here under the Todos brand. And we expect to do that hopefully very soon once we hear back from the FDA. We think that could be a major event for the company. So in summary, we have proprietary technology platforms. As a result of what we've done now with our different clients, we've created scalable, replicable models with high automation to be able to do scale. We see several opportunities in the marketplace for a variety of our different products to get strategic partners, and we are pushing in that direction. We've had obviously some great relationships out of South Korea. We brought in a venture capital investor out of that group, out of that country, that is really supporting us, and so we expect them to continue to support us. We've got near-term revenue that we're generating now, and that we expect to generate from partnerships going forward, and we're going after a large market opportunity with our proprietary products that we're bridging into with COVID from a revenue perspective. So we believe that Todos is extremely well positioned to take advantage of our proprietary technology platforms, and really what could be an absolute game changer, obviously, for the company is the Tolo franchise, where we have the diagnostic, which is currently monitoring hospital viral activity, and we're providing an inhibitor so that we can really evaluate the clinical utility of our Tolo test biomarker because of our Tolovir pharmaceutical grade 3CL protease inhibitor that is the most advanced protease inhibitor for COVID-19, targeting the 3CL protease in the world. And then finally, obviously, we have our Tolovir dietary supplement that is on the market today, and we're waiting for the FDA to confirm whether they'll approve our updated dosing regimen that we feel could be more beneficial for patients who are looking to fight circulating coronaviruses. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to our presentation. And I will open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Gerald. Great presentation. Again, some of these questions, some of our viewers might have joined late, so they might seem redundant, but all questions are good questions. Let's start with this. How are you currently financing your current operations? Equity, and if so, at what valuation? Or debt, if so, is it convertible to equity, and at what price?
So we are right now funding with debt that is convertible into equity at a price of 0.599 cents a share, so 5.99 cents a share. That is what we call the crossover round that has been led by Yosman Group. And we anticipate, because of some of the features of that round, that will exchange from debt into equity at the time we do a listing on a national exchange, that we'll be able to get there and equitize the debt so that we won't have to do an additional raise once we get on there. Beyond that, we also obviously have product sales. And so that, that's just a sales cycle becoming revenue and taking in the capital. That takes some time to happen, but that is in the process of happening.
So do you think that the stock price with the general decline in biotechs over the past 6 to 8 weeks?
No, I think the stock price, I think there was dilution in the company, so the shares were diluted. And I think that, that dilution is working itself through, unfortunately, and it's having a short-term impact on the stock price. I think the value of what's, being done underlying the company ultimately is going to overcome that. But, I think the float having been diluted is ultimately what led to the decline. So now that we've got our crossover round in place, and these are guys who are not selling those instruments, so none of those investments in the crossover round have been converted. There's just some legacy that is clearing out. Now that that's clearing out, we believe that there's an ability to appreciate. And as we start to hit some of these critical milestones, we think that we're hopeful that we can see an appreciation in the stock price.
Is the current market cap $24 million, and is that accurate on the OTC markets?
Yes, that is accurate on the OTC markets.
All right. So are you going to release your quarterly financials on time?
Yes, we will.
Okay. So this is a question from someone who missed the beginning. So when will this be available direct to consumer? And what is your plan to get the products to market? Do you have a network in place?
So different, obviously, products are going to have different, outlets. If we're talking about Tolovir, that is available today. You can go online, alchemistkitchen.com, and buy it now. We have not done any marketing around it because we didn't have a supply chain. However, our supply chain is being released. Our commercial supply chain is being released in the next couple of weeks, and we will be starting a direct-to-consumer campaign based upon mytolovir.com, which is a domain that we are now building out specifically for that purpose. And it's going to be targeting the 3-cell protease inhibition activity of Tolovir. From the diagnostics perspective, we do COVID testing. So just like you can do COVID testing with every other lab out there, Provista is currently doing COVID testing today. We're supporting Screen Actors Guild, CBS Viacom. We're supporting some surgery centers as well as several other groups. And now the focus is going to be on, because of the automation we've put in, we're going to be going after reference lab work for a lot of labs that have volume but haven't been able to get their costs down and have had to forego other kinds of testing to get into the COVID game. Now that, COVID-19 testing volumes are declining, which we expect to reverse, but it's going to reverse on an institutional basis, which means costs are going to have to go down. Labs that have automation are going to be the ones that will be able to survive and thrive. And so we're gearing up Provista to be able to take on the travel market, the employer market, the school market, and the nursing home market, which are all areas we feel are going to have some degree of institutional testing for the next 6 to 18 months.
Okay. A viewer said, excellent presentation. Is the Tolovir product plant-based? And once the FDA approves the product, what is your plan for distribution and advertising? So just give a little bit more details on specifically the Tolovir.
Sure. So with regards to Tolovir, it is approved now. So you can buy it today at alchemistkitchen.com. So it's already approved. Right now, what we're waiting on is approval for an updated dosing regimen, which is a much higher dose. And over a shorter period of time, something more like Tamiflu that you would expect to see. So yes, and we are planning to market that heavily, and we're putting all the infrastructure in place to be able to go direct to consumer and market that product. Okay.
And what is the timeline to uplist Todos? What will you have to do, a reverse split?
We will have to do a reverse split. The ratio of that reverse split right now is set at 1-for-10. Obviously, with where the stock price, where it is, that's not viable. And so what we're focused on is marketing. We're going to be getting out and marketing the company. It's one of the reasons why we're doing conferences like this. Management is, eagerly waiting to buy. We have a couple of more announcements we have to make before we'll be able to, buy, because we have material non-public information. But we do have to get the share price up in order for that reverse split to make sense. We are hopeful, and we think that we have catalysts coming up in the next, 2 to 3 months to help us get listed by before August. which is our target. So sometime between now and August, our focus is really on the marketing, bringing new shareholders, and meeting those requirements.
Last question, talk a little bit about market awareness. What do you intend to do to improve the ability of shareholders to communicate with the company, increase your general investor awareness of the company? And will we be seeing March and April revenue numbers over the next couple of weeks?
Sure. So yeah, we're going to be having March. We're trying to get back from a revenue number perspective. We're trying to get on a quarterly basis to get away from the monthly revenue, because we think that it actually became detrimental to the company with people so laser focused on the monthly revenue and not all the other things the company was doing. But we will be releasing those numbers as we release our quarterly numbers, so we can get back on a normal reporting schedule. And we'll also be doing an investor conference call at that point in time for a business update and to review our numbers. With regards to market awareness, obviously you've got to be very careful with how you do that in the OTC markets to make sure you're compliant. And so we've been slowly building up our market awareness infrastructure. We've done some partnerships. So we're now a client of Sequire, for example, under SRAX. We know that they've got a significant retail base, and we're starting to target our messaging towards those groups. We're going to be doing more investor conferences. We are also going to be going after foreign investors. So now that we've got an institutional investor out of South Korea who's backing the company, they've made some introductions to market awareness firms in South Korea, and we think we can pick up several shareholders there. Ultimately, we also see that Tolovir, given that we're a direct competitor of Pfizer, and we're actually ahead of Pfizer from a clinical development perspective at the current time, we think that that can attract significant market awareness. And one of the reasons, beyond just the obvious that there's COVID, it's a pandemic, and so we need to get this product to market fast. If we're showing the results that we're seeing so far, we think that could have a major impact on the broader investment community's interest in Todos. And so we're starting to fine tune that story because that, I believe, is going to generate just a wealth of interest. And then people will realize, wait a minute, they've got a phase 2-3 clinical trial of this product that is in the same category Pfizer's targeting. But they also have a low dose version that's out there as a dietary supplement, that we could take today. That is a compelling story that we think will resonate with investors once they understand that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. We have a bunch more questions, especially related to your cancer products. So know that we're going to be sending these directly to you, but this was a great opportunity to bring awareness to your company, and hope that you'll join us again. Lots of questions coming in and great presentation, Gerald. Thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That's our first presentation. We've got a full day of great presentations up. Remember, when we do take this quick break, you're going to see a black screen for just a brief moment as we move on to the next presenter, but stay with us. We'll be right back. And if you are on an Apple device, you got to click the play button to launch the next live presentation. So we'll be right back.